Hello and welcome to another episode of Atomic Vinyl Reviews. Today I'll be reviewing Pacific Rim Uprising. This is the sequel to the movie Pacific Rim. I was going to upload this yesterday film this rather yesterday as the film just came out yesterday and I saw it on the first day, but I was super tired when I got home, so I'm doing it now. Let's see. I'll try to start off with a really quick spoiler-free, just my thoughts on it, because once I start getting into it, I'd prefer not to have to worry about trying to hide spoilers and stuff. So basically, overall, I liked the film. I think it was definitely an improvement over the ads, basically, or the trailers. Overall, it's nowhere near as good as the first one. Actually, the first one I wasn't that big a fan of until rewatching it a couple of times, and it really grew on me. So we'll see whether that happens with this one. But for the moment, it doesn't compare to that one. On a visual level and a storytelling level, I guess. What else can I say without giving away spoilers? Uh, Mainly, one of the first things is that I found it. You never get bored, or at least I never got bored throughout the film because it's quickly paced and a lot goes on, and there's some creative stuff in there. But the film has an issue with it doesn't let you sit anywhere too long, and it doesn't really build character or atmosphere as much as the first one did. So I'll go into that a little more later in the review. Uh, some of the actors were good, some of them were like a bit all around I had with the first one I had this issue where the basically the human characters weren't that interesting, but the fight scenes were pretty spectacular. But after seeing this one, you kind of respect the acting in the first film a little more because even though they're not doing anything like that you can like look at and go, okay, that's a bit wrong. It's just written or acted a bit less naturally, I guess. I'd say something about it feels a little more amateur. But the film, one thing I will give this film is that it went pretty all out with its sort of ideas and what happens in this film. And another big positive in this one was it was pretty funny. Not every joke landed though, but some were pretty good moments in there. So I'll give it that. And yeah, just I'd say give this one a go, give this one a chance if you haven't seen it, and let me know what you think down in the comments. That's my free part of the review. Let's get into spoilers now. So I said that some of the characters were good, some were a bit less good. It's basically none of the characters real uh, like apart from the returning characters from the previous film, and the main guy, I'd say were pretty much the best characters in this, or the ones that were developed the best, or at least interesting to watch. So there's the main guy in this. I forgot what his name was in the film, or the actor's name, but he's the guy who played Finn in Star Wars: The Force Awakens. So he was really good in this. No complaints about him. He wasn't written like super well, but neither was the protagonist in the last film. And the returning characters, we have Mako, the blue-haired girl from the first one, and we have the two scientists. There's a guy from the weird ratty-faced guy from Torchwood, that series, and there's the other one with the glasses. So they did some interesting things with those characters. First off, let's start with Mako. She's basically the lead character's half sister, I guess, adopted sister, and she didn't do all that much in this film, I guess. Um, obviously this is the spoiler section, so you either know or just don't care to about not being spoiled about it, that she dies in it fairly early, which is a bit of a shame. And the way it happens, like there's so much going on all the time, and it didn't really feel like it felt like it could have been done better, that moment where through a lot of the film it's like this is going to be a big moment, and like you're just waiting for them to play that Pacific Rim theme, because they had a pretty good theme in the first film, and Del Toro was really good at like getting those emotional beats, like feeling like really in the pocket when the film wanted you to feel something. He knew how to make you feel it in that moment. Here it felt like just kind of one thing going to another and another, and you didn't really feel like, probably to do with like not pausing too much to really build that atmosphere, that some of those things just like, oh, okay, that happened, now this happened. And granted, it was all I found it all pretty entertaining, and it was a little less dynamic than the first film. So yeah, she I don't think she had the blue hair anymore, so I don't know if that's an improvement or a downgrade, but and yeah, so the last thing she did was she sent a message, which was decoded to be a, what you would call it, a secret base, about, because there was this. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but there's some things that they didn't really also follow up on, like particularly this just one thing where she sent, like, her dying thing that she does is she gives them the information to go to this abandoned Jaeger facility in Siberia or something, where the this rogue Jaeger is apparently that's where they've been operating from, although we don't really know that. They're just like, okay, her last thing after being killed by this thing was that location, but we don't really, that place is blown up by it while they're still arriving there, and so we don't really find out what was there, or like the exact connection there was to that thing, or how she knew, or any of that. Yeah, let's just keep going through the characters. So the scientists are no longer working together. The ratty-faced scientist, he's still working for the Jaeger program, and the one of the glasses, Newt or something, he's working in China for a company that's I forgot what they're called, something industries. Anyway, it kind of starts off where like you predict the plot seems to be going in this direction where it's going to be like, okay, so there's this company in China that wants to mass produce these drones, Jaegers. So they're not like fully robotically piloted. They're still piloted by somebody, but somewhere else, and they're remotely piloted basically. And they're passing this bill to let the production begin, and it kind of then this like evil rogue Jaeger starts attacking the people, and it's like played off as if it's the company that built this thing to attack on purpose to provoke, them to pass the bill to allow them to build this thing. And that's like what you think's gonna happen, because that storyline's been done a million times. And it was cool to see that they didn't actually really do that. What they ended up doing was something a little bit more creative and a little bit weird. And I don't know how everyone else felt about that, but so basically the glasses, the Newt guy with the glasses scientist, he's been kind of tainted by I also forget what they call it, just the interdimensional alien race, from drifting with the kaiju brains. So now so now they're kind of controlling him basically, brainwashed him, and so that he's basically behind everything, and it's kind of interesting the relationship between him and the other scientist guy because they got a really sort of funny thing going on. And like I said, the movie is pretty funny in moments. And oh, we do get this thing that was pretty enjoyable where we saw like the drones once they were finally released. Um, he set off something which caused them to basically have like the kaijus grow inside of them and take control of them. And so what we get is a very basically like a live action Evangelion, mass-produced Evangelion type attack for a bit until they blow them up. But that was a nice little reference there. And yeah, so there's also the girl. There's a girl at the beginning who there's like this drama with her. She's like she and the main guy. Oh yeah, there's at the beginning there's this really funny scene. So going back to how it's funny, there's the like this girl steals something from the main guy. Well, he's actually trying to steal something, but she steals it before he can steal it, and then ends up chasing her. And then there's basically this she builds her own like mini robot that she pilots, and but they're like illegal, so there's a full-sized Jaeger that's like a giant policeman that's just going around trying to stop them, being like halt, in this really funny voice. So also in scenes like that and later on in the film, I really enjoyed, though the CGI could be really bad at some moments, I enjoyed this some of the lower perspective shots from like a human eye looking up at what was happening. But those they didn't have a lot of those, but when they did, they were really effective. But yeah, so she was all right. Not much going on with her. There were a bunch of like young students that were learning all the like the trainees and stuff like that, and all these just new characters being thrown in. I think there were a bit too many of those because none of them really went into all that much depth, and even when they did, they didn't really do anything with that later on. So that felt a little bit like a wasted opportunity, or something that they could have spent more time focusing on like the very main cast on, instead of that whole drama with her and those people. But yeah, other than that, the characters were possible. Definitely not as bad as, say, they were definitely not like super boring, like say in Godzilla 2014, like Soldier Boy in that one. Ugh, makes me cringe thinking about that. But nowhere near on the level like Bryan Cranston in that film, or even the previous cast like Idris Elba or anything like that from Pacific Rim. So I'd say the cast and the acting was not the best, but passable and entertaining enough. Now I'll get to the effects. They were pretty mixed. Overall, like what you saw in the ads and the trailers is what you got with the effects. So there some parts looked better and some parts looked worse. Like I've never watched a Transformers film actually, but a lot of it reminded me of like what you'd see in some of those. And it just compared to the last film and like the way they filmed it and the lighting and like the textures of the grit and the rain and just the color in those was really it was nothing like that in this one. This one was more sort of advanced video game type graphics really, through a lot of the fight scenes and stuff, like a lot of the mechs, their movements, even though they're robots, weren't as robotic or organic if that's a strange word to use, but they just looked like you could picture them rendering on a computer sometimes. I especially noticed this when there was where Gypsy Avenger and the I think it was Obsidian something was what they called it, but the Rogue Jaeger, which turned out to be piloted by a what was it called? A kaiju brain instead of an actual pilot. So that fight there felt a little stilted because of the animation there, and especially the scenes towards the end. There's a big fight in Tokyo because actually, I'll just before I go into that, I'll point out that probably the one thing which I felt detracted from the first film was kind of their explanation of what the whole, like, they just kind of like quickly from some small evidence, like very quickly deducted the whole plot of the first, the whole plan of the aliens from the first one, or the kaiju from the first one, which both felt a bit abrupt and just not as grand as you'd expect, and kind of like cartoon silly, where the literal plot that they had was to dump a kaiju into Mount Fuji to make the entire Pacific volcanic tectonic, all the volcanoes around the tectonic plate basically ignite. And I don't know, that just sounds a bit cartoony or sort of parody of a kaiju film, I guess. So I don't know, maybe if they played up the film to be even more silly, that would have worked, but I don't know, just it didn't fit with the first one, and it kind of, because it was going back and explaining something from the first one, it didn't really suit it, I think. But going back to that battle, one thing which was really cool was that some of the scenes in Tokyo, I don't know how much, because like 95% of it was green screened, but the other 5% was filmed in my hometown. Because they were filming here in Brisbane, Australia, scenes not far from where I live. They were filming scenes of Tokyo. I knew this like a year ago at least, that they were doing this. I actually missed going out and trying to see what they were filming in person, unfortunately, but it was cool just to know that a large portion of this film was filmed here in my hometown, and other portions were filmed in Australia. I think a large portion, probably like the green screen stuff, might have been done down on the Gold Coast, because they do a lot of that stuff there, because it's cheaper to film here apparently for a lot of the Hollywood movies. It was the same with Thor Ragnarok. They filmed the New York scene down in the city on a street, on that street corner where Thor and Loki were like dropped off in New York by Doctor Strange for that like 5 seconds. That was filmed on a street corner in Brisbane that I regularly go past, so that's pretty cool. Anyway, too much ranting about that. But yeah, that whole battle, it was very much again, it had the same problems in the film, where just a lot of stuff was happening and we didn't really catch the atmosphere of it. Like, if you say in a Godzilla movie, for one, it's usually practical effects, so that you can just enjoy this like beautiful practical scenery that they build, and all the, especially if it's a place like Tokyo with all the lights and the signs, and usually it's or like the beautiful Japanese castles and stuff like that. But even in a CGI film like Shin Godzilla, where they do that in CGI, they still manage to add a lot of beauty and something visually impressive with color and with the music and stuff like that, and just the story beats and the drama of it. Here it was a bit, again, they just kind of, lots happening at once, fast-paced, which was good, but they didn't sort of soak up any atmosphere or drama, and part of the reason for that was the buildings looked very hollow, and the whole it felt like a more like say Godzilla Saves the Earth or Godzilla Unleashed, like one of those levels is kind of what it felt like. So it wasn't overly atmospheric, and uh, like even the kaiju, like uh, so what happens is the drones, once they get their inner Eva going, and they're all out against the people for like 5 minutes before they're automatically blown up, basically they release, basically open all these portals that go back to the kaiju realm, and like kaiju start emerging, and they're blown up, and like you see like the portals disappear and the kaiju's like cut in half, which is pretty cool. And then just off screen, apparently we find out that three managed to get through. I think it's two category fours and one category five. Um, so it's a and these kaiju's aren't very interesting. For one reason, they're shown off screen. They're all off screen when they emerge, so we don't get the cool reveal like that. I mean, we do get the reveal. They're really it's like it's a little underwhelming because they just kind of just like, okay, there's a kaiju, there's a kaiju, and there's a kaiju, and they're just kind of, they don't really, the their designs aren't really like super interesting. They're just more like the more generic kaiju of the Pacific Rim universe, basically. And two, they don't show them off in a dramatic way. They're just like, here's this, here's this, here's this. And then pretty much after we get a glance at them without really getting to see them properly, they're just a couple of human scenes happen, and then they're just fighting them in Tokyo. They're just all crawling towards Mount Fuji, and all the Jaegers get rocket launched over there, and then they just land and do their action poses and they fight. Um, and yeah, the fight's entertaining and cool, and there's some funny stuff in there. Uh, but it's not until the kaiju's until we get the next kaiju that it actually looks pretty cool. So what happens is the new guy, the glasses scientist guy, he's there and he's having like the time of his life on this rooftop, pressing buttons and remote control, doing stuff and like talking to himself, which is pretty funny. And then he releases these army of weird tiny squid monsters, which run right by what are they called? All the Jaegers, and they're just like standing there in a circle looking down, and then they all run up to the three kaiju, and then they begin to like mutate all three of them together to form one massive kaiju. And what's kind of funny about this scene is like it's all happening, and like you can see like it mutating together, but this whole time it's like the Jaegers, they're just standing there waiting. They're not really like, if it's kind of very impractical that they don't take the chance to attack while this thing is in metamorphosis mode, because it looked a little vulnerable at that time. So I don't know. They were just like waiting for the movie to have its moment before attacking. So that was a bit silly, but when we do see the monster, I legitimately liked this one. It looks like they spent a bit more time getting the animation on it done, so it does look better. In some close-ups, it looks very cool. And the fight scene with it is a lot more interesting, because they actually, in that build-up, while the Jaegers were just standing there, they actually gave the time to, build a little atmosphere and help give this creature some personality. So, and it worked out great for this particular instance, and so the battle after that was a lot more interesting, and finally some people actually die. So, um, So that was good, I guess, because it's kind of getting weird. Where like they're just fighting and fighting and fighting against these three, and nobody was really. It felt like there were no losses on either side happening, which just kind of didn't add to the drama of it. But stuff started to happen finally with that going on, and eventually most of the Jaegers get taken out. There's actually a cool scene where the girl from the beginning, she goes out in the escape pod and she crashes down in the middle of Tokyo, right next to there's the Gundam statue, which is that life-size Gundam mech statue they have in Tokyo. So she's right in front of that, of all places, when she falls out, and then we have the kaiju just walking past her casually, because I think that was the last standing mech, and just walking off to Mount Fuji. The end climax is pretty cool overall. They have this crazy. It's not as dramatic as the last one, but also in the last film the climax wasn't the most climactic part of the movie for me actually either. It was a bit too underwatery and a bit too. The action wasn't quite there, I found, as compared just because of the Hong Kong scene earlier in that film with Otachi and them like flying in the sky, and that's where they unveil the sword. And so there is more flying in the sky in this one, and it is pretty tense and dramatic, and that smaller mech comes back from earlier with the Chinese company owner lady piloting it with a remote system, which so that was all pretty cool, and they it was kind of funny when they did actually end up killing the kaiju right near the summit of Mount Fuji, which I didn't know, is Mount Fuji an actual active volcano still? Because I thought it was dormant or something, but not something that has lava literally bubbling at the top. But then again, this is set in the future, so Pacific Rim was set in the future, and this is set even more in the future. But yeah, so let me know if you know about that in the comments. Another thing which was a bit odd was just I felt that even though I know this was set in the future and in the future of the future basically, because this is 10 years after the first film, there was just all the future tech. Some of it was just a bit too, I don't know, it just felt out of place, because I felt what was cool about the first one was it felt, even though it was like this post-apocalyptic sort of world where it was still, but there was still like grounded in like the apart from the Jaegers and everything, it was still grounded in roughly sort of normal technology. But now it's just like because it's all like CGI buildings and all this stuff, and just added like CGI planes and flying weird gizmos and lasers and holograms and stuff, it just comes off as feeling there's like less substance to it, less to ground on, less sort of less grounding there. Like for instance, Shin Godzilla worked so well because there was this real big contrast between the sort of mundane, realistic, very grey flat sort of bureaucratic world, which looked very real, very almost sort of documentary style filmmaking, and then this unearthly being, and it really worked in that film. And in the first Pacific Rim, there was the weight to the, first of all, the effects were done better, and there was more weight to it, and that one was just more beautiful, and like just the environments they created was a little bit more, it just had that Del Toro flair, which you find in color, that you find in almost like this sort of fantasy, sort of futuristic stuff that you find in the Hellboy series and stuff like that, which I really enjoyed. But in this one, it felt a little bit more generic, and like you couldn't connect with this world as much. Like just the but you know, perhaps if they spent more time on it, it would have also helped that out. Like, for instance, there's a lot of cool ideas in this film. Like, we start off with the main character, and he's living like there's this cool joke where he's like living like a sort of luxuriously um, in like a mansion, but it turns out he's living in half a mansion in like an abandoned city because the other half's been, you know, that's where the kaiju battles happened and like it's been abandoned. And so there's like, you know, the skeleton of the kaiju just crushed on half the building. And like that would have been a really cool place to explore and spend more time on, but instead we're just moved to like the giant CGI bunker where all the Jaegers are, and also they have less personality than in the first one because most of them are piloted by those younger people who aren't really very interesting, and there's no like standout one that's like the hero or anything. But unlike the first one, where it kind of worked that Gypsy Danger stood out because that film had more focus on the main characters, and so you got a real sense of connection to the Jaegers and in general, and so you can connect more to, you know, at least one of them because they spend more effort focusing on it. Well, in this one, they're kind of like a team, but you don't really care about most of the team, and the Jaegers are slightly less interesting and unique. I mean, just kind of more like generic cartoon sort of mechs or robots or stuff that just go around zooming, shooting stuff. But and so like they don't really have as much of a backstory for each of them. They like literally have a scene where when the girl character first arrives at the facility where they have all the mechs, and she's like, "Whoa, I love this one, and I love this one," and they have a lot of moments where they just kind of explain very quick lines of backstory, both from the first film and just stuff that we're just finding out now. That doesn't It just comes up more like exposition than something somebody would naturally say. So yeah, there's a bit of exposition, but it's not long drawn out. It's just kind of short and awkward, unfortunately. So I don't know which is better, um, but that's just how it is in this film. So I felt less connection with them, but I still wanted to because I do like Gypsy Danger, and so I was trying to connect to Gypsy Avenger, but somewhat less, more so. It feels like even though this is a sequel to that film, it has less of a mythos in the past than the first one did. Like the first one has more of a grounded, it feels more grounded in some sort of heavy backstory about this real intense thing that people lived through and all the struggle there. But in this one, it doesn't feel as grounded to it as the first one did, even though we didn't see that one apart from a few flashbacks. But this one had a whole movie preceding it, which is kind of odd. One last thing that maybe not even a last thing, but one thing that I was intending to mention, that just like I was saying that the previous one had some really strong story beats and like you could feel those moments. A big part of that was I felt it was with the music, like it was that theme, and with, well, definitely not just the music, like just the cinematography and the narration in parts, and just the way the story was cut, basically the editing. But in this one, I found the music and the music cues to not really sync up fully. Like I can see why they put some music here and there and how it fit, but it didn't feel as dynamic. Like when an action scene was happening, there was like action music in the background, but it was added there more, if more in a more amateur way, I felt, and the music just wasn't as dynamic as the first one. Because when they actually ended up using the theme, it was like, oh, okay, we're using the theme at this moment now, when they're just like prepping stuff. Uh, Although when they did use it, there was a really funny shot. When they first used it, there was a really funny shot of the ratty scientist's face, just kind of smiling because he's like getting stuff done, and then I don't know, it's just you gotta watch that moment just to, to experience it. But it just seemed like an odd point to use the music. It wasn't like in a dramatic battle scene or after a victory, and it was used very sparingly, but not in the best way. And but I'm happy they didn't really use the music from the what you call it, the trailers. Was not a fan of the music in the trailers. I was getting really worried that that would be the tone in the film. No offense to anybody who absolutely loves that music, but I much prefer the original theme from the first one, and the score to that one. This film did some interesting stuff and some creative stuff with the material from the first one, and took it in. They didn't. I felt like they weren't afraid to do things with this one. Unfortunately, they didn't really do them in. They felt really new to this. I felt like that the people writing it and directing it felt kind of new to this, so they didn't. They had that ambition and they had a bit of creativity where they had all these creative ideas. They just didn't explore any of them and flesh them out as well as I would have liked to seen it. It feels like um, that should have been done, and I know a lot of people say that there's all this like, I feel like a better film would have been to have done a prequel, basically, to the first Pacific Rim, but I know a lot of people would have said that there's already a lot of prequel material that's not in the movie, that's like in books and comics and stuff like that. But and I feel like it's going to be the same with this one, that a lot of people really like this one will say that a lot of that stuff is going to be explored in that realm. But I feel like this one could have really used a lot more fleshing out with some of its ideas, because it did have some really cool stuff in here and some creative ideas and just some weird things that you wouldn't have expected. And but even and they crammed a lot of that in, and while they did cram a lot of that stuff in, they didn't flesh it out, and they left out quite a bit of stuff. Like, there was a lot of characters from the first one which we didn't really know what happened to, like the lead guy from the first one. He's just not in this, as well as, I don't know, just like all the Jaegers from that one are gone. Like, there's no sort of homage to that. Like in the first one, they had like a whole different. They had all these. What was really cool about the Jaegers was they had them from like the ultra old ones, the first gen with the big Russian one, all the way up to the Australian one, which was like the newest model. And Gypsy Danger was another pretty old one, the only one that was still fitted with the nuclear reactor and had like this sort of cool, sort of like, this is the vintage, like this is how they used to do it in the old days, and it was so cool. But now they're just like, they're just like all pretty much the same. They just have like different features, but and all their like attacks are a little too lasery and like lightning boltish. Like, I felt like there was more visceral fighting in the first one, like with the sword cutting through things. Its blade was really cool in the first one, with the way the plasma cannon blew stuff up, and all those attacks were really cool in the first one. Well, this one, it was more sort of, I guess, like, if you think about it, like from the original Star Wars series, the fighting in that one, where it was slower, but you could feel it a bit more. There was more weight to it, whereas the prequels were more like shooty, lasery. So there was a lot of that. And I feel like overall the film, that people like the average going audience who saw Pacific Rim, who weren't, kaiju fans, who didn't know where this stuff was coming from or how to watch a film like this, that just kind of dismissed it as like, oh, this is like one of them Transformer things where you turn off your brain and you just watch random crap and you don't really care. They didn't see that like there's the people who like don't know that there's like a proper way to make a kaiju film and like to make it really really special. They didn't see that in the first one. Then they're not going to see anything more in this. In fact, although the people who saw like that special sort of quality in the first one are probably not going to see as much of it in here, but I still think the most audiences are probably going to enjoy this, find it funny, and I do definitely recommend checking it out. It's unlike some films, like sometimes when it's a sequel, like you kind of you feel a bit upset after watching it, like yeah, it's not the original. With this one, like I don't know how to feel because like I said, the bit about the kaiju's, their goal from the first one was when we find out is apparently to jump into Mount Fuji. It kind of detracts from that film, and just seeing like that Mako dies like sort of underwhelmingly, and that like all the Jaegers have been like replaced by these random ones, which we don't really get to really appreciate as much as we got to appreciate the first lot. It's a bit underwhelming, but on the other hand, the film is entertaining, it's lighthearted, and it's fun, and creative in a lot of ways. So I have like mixed feelings about it there. But unlike say Godzilla 2014, I don't feel like sort of like a grumpiness towards it. I feel about this film a little kind of the same way I feel about Jurassic World, whereas like it doesn't really like it's actually very similar to that one in a lot of ways. Like the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, the first one, they felt a little grounded, and like it felt a pretty superficial movie, but it was done really well and it was special in its own way. And that the Jurassic World one was really fun, and I had a great time watching that movie. The actual effects felt hollow in that, and the story a lot even more superficial, but even though it was enjoyable. So it has that same vibe. Uh, I really go off on tangents in these things, don't I? I'm sorry about that. Most of my reviews are scripted. At least my figure reviews, the proper ones where I recorded in like my recording studio, record the talking there, and then I film it all close and stuff. So I'm used to writing those ones out, but I'm trying to get more into the spontaneous talking ones with at least the film reviews like this, just because I don't have time to make those proper ones very much. Um, so sorry about my tangents, but I was saying overall the film is gonna be conflicting for some people. Some people just aren't gonna care. Some people are probably gonna love it and just have a ball with it, and some are just gonna not care for it. I don't see this as getting really high reviews, but I think this feels very much like a high budget B movie, and I'd say go out and see it. It's cool. It's, Del Toro produced it at the very least, so it's got that going for it. Um, yeah, what else can I say? Just go out, see it for yourself. I bet most of you have already seen it if you're watching this, so just I'm dying to hear your thoughts because as of the recording of this, I have not watched any reviews. I have some tabs open with reviews ready to watch because I'm dying to see what everyone else thought of it. But these are just my initial thoughts, and I'm actually quite stunned I could talk about this one for so long because going into this my mind was blank and I didn't know where to start. Anyway, take care. Yeah, just let me know what you think. Let me know what's your favorite kaiju from the Pacific Rim series and your favorite Jaeger. For me, my favorite kaiju is definitely Otachi. The battle from the first one in the Hong Kong brawl, I guess you'd call it, going by the NECA figure. That was phenomenal, and this kaiju is just the most coolest design. And actually, on an interesting note, I think the final kaiju from this film might be my second favorite one. Maybe. I'm not sure. Knife Head was alright. I wasn't really too much of a fan of that weird gorilla one. Sorry I forget all their names. But yeah, what's your favorite kaiju and your favorite Jaeger? Mine's just Gypsy Danger, just because I have this figure and it's beautiful. And that's why. Thanks for watching. Happy collecting, and may all your vinyl be irradiated vinyl. Over and out.